Sarah drove through the barren stretch of highway, her car's headlights slicing through the oppressive darkness. The radio crackled with static, a grim reminder of her isolation. She had been driving for hours, the monotonous landscape stretching endlessly before her. It was late, and she needed to refuel both her car and herself. In the distance, a flickering neon sign appeared like a ghostly beacon. "Big All's Gas and Go," it advertised, the go half-heartedly illuminated. Sarah pulled into the station, relieved to see the dim lights of the pumps and the faint outline of the convenience store. As she parked, a shiver ran down her spine, though she couldn't quite pinpoint why. It was just a gas station in the middle of nowhere. The attendant emerged from the dimly lit office, a gaunt man in his 60s with hollow eyes and a weary expression. "Evening," he said, his voice rasping like gravel. "Hi, I just need to fill up," Sarah replied, trying to shake off her unease. She stepped out and began to pump gas, her gaze wandering over the surrounding landscape. The station seemed oddly neglected, with grime and dust coating everything. Inside the store, Sarah wandered through the aisles, hoping to find something to stave off her hunger. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting unsettling shadows on the shelves stocked with expired goods. A bell jingled as she approached the counter, where the attendant was now fiddling with a tattered newspaper. "Do you have any coffee?" Sarah asked. The attendant looked up, his eyes seeming to darken momentarily. "Coffee's old. Might want to grab something else." She glanced at the old coffee maker, the last remnants of brown sludge barely visible through the grimy glass. Deciding to forego the coffee, she grabbed a bag of chips and a bottle of water. The attendant rang up her purchases in silence, his eyes never leaving hers. As Sarah prepared to leave, she noticed a dark stain on the floor near the entrance. It looked like old blood. A shiver crawled up her spine, but she shrugged it off, attributing it to the station's decrepit state. With her purchases in hand and her tank full, Sarah said goodbye and got back into her car. The attendant watched her leave, his hollow eyes reflecting the dim light of the station. The road back to the highway seemed to stretch longer than before. Sarah's headlights caught a glimmer of something strange ahead. A figure stumbled onto the road, dragging a blooded limb. Sarah slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop. Her heart pounded as she watched the figure approach. It was a man, barely conscious, his clothes torn and stained with blood. She hesitated but then threw open her door. "Are you okay? What happened?" The man's eyes were wide with terror. "Run. Run now, they're coming." Before Sarah could react, the ground around them began to tremble. From the shadows emerged grotesque, misshapen creatures, half human, half nightmare. Their eyes glowed with a malevolent hunger. The man's warning was swallowed by the horrific sight as Sarah scrambled back into her car. She slammed the gas pedal, the engine roaring to life as she sped away. Her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, her heart racing. Behind her, the creatures chased with unnatural speed, their eerie wails piercing the night air. Sarah's mind raced. She had to get to the city, where she hoped to find safety. The highway stretched endlessly, illuminated only by the narrow beam of her headlights. The creatures pursued relentlessly, their grotesque forms dancing in and out of the shadows. Desperation fueled her drive, and she pushed the car to its limits. Finally, the city skyline appeared on the horizon, a glimmer of hope amid the encroaching darkness. Sarah barreled down the highway, her car's tires screeching as she exited onto a city street. She navigated the bustling city roads with frantic speed, weaving through traffic in a desperate attempt to escape. But as she entered the city, the streetlights cast long, distorted shadows, and the buildings seemed to close in around her. The creatures had somehow followed her, their grotesque forms emerging from every darkened alley and shadowed corner. The city, once a beacon of safety, now felt like a labyrinth of horror. Sarah's car screeched to a halt as she found herself trapped in a narrow, dark alley. The creatures closed in, their eyes glowing with a hungry light. In her panic, she noticed the buildings around her were not what they seemed. Their facades were twisted and warped, like nightmarish caricatures of their former selves. She fled on foot, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The city's familiar streets now seemed alien and hostile. She ran past buildings that seemed to pulsate with a sinister energy, the wails of the creatures growing ever closer. Every turn she took only led her deeper into the city's nightmarish underbelly. Finally, she found herself in an old, decrepit building. The door creaked as she entered, her eyes adjusting to the darkness inside. She hoped it would offer some respite, but the interior was a macabre gallery of horror, filled with grotesque sculptures and distorted paintings that seemed to come alive in the dim light. Sarah's desperate search for safety led her to a stairwell. She ascended, hoping to find an exit or at least a place to hide. The higher she climbed, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air grew colder, and an unsettling silence enveloped her. At the top of the stairs, she found a door marked with an eerie symbol. Desperate, she pushed it open. The room beyond was a bizarre, otherworldly chamber, filled with shifting shadows and whispering voices. In the center stood a grotesque altar, adorned with symbols and artifacts that seemed to pulsate with dark energy. As Sarah approached, the creatures from the gas station emerged from the shadows, their forms merging with the dark energies of the room. They advanced with a sinister, deliberate pace, their eyes glowing with a hunger that transcended mere flesh. In that moment of terror, Sarah realized that the city was not a refuge but a trap, a nightmarish realm where reality itself had been twisted by ancient, malevolent forces. Her struggle for survival had led her into the heart of darkness, and there was no escape from the horrors that now surrounded her. The last thing Sarah saw was the nightmarish faces of the creatures closing in, their hunger insatiable. The darkness consumed her, and the city's oppressive silence returned, as if the horrors of the night had never existed at all. And so, in the depths of the city, the fuel of the damned found its final resting place, a reminder of the ancient evils that lie hidden in the shadows, waiting for those who dare to uncover their dark secrets. The city's oppressive silence seemed to settle over Sarah like a shroud. The night's chaos had come to an unsettling halt, leaving only the echo of her screams in the darkened chamber. As her vision blurred and consciousness slipped away, she felt herself being drawn into the depths of the room, as if the very walls were consuming her. When Sarah awoke, she found herself lying on a cold, hard surface. Her head throbbed, and her limbs felt heavy. She opened her eyes to find herself in what appeared to be an old, abandoned warehouse. The air was thick with dust, and the flickering light from a single overhead bulb cast eerie shadows on the walls. The shadows seemed to move, writhing in the dim light. Pushing herself up, Sarah discovered she was not alone. The creatures from before were nowhere in sight, but their haunting presence lingered. The room was filled with strange symbols and ancient artifacts, similar to those she had seen in the previous chamber. It felt as though she had been transported to another part of the city, yet she remained ensnared in the web of dark forces that plagued it. She noticed a large, rusted door in one corner of the warehouse. Gathering her strength, she stumbled toward it, each step echoing through the cavernous space. As she reached the door, she felt a chill, as if the air itself were alive with malevolent intent. She hesitated, but the thought of staying in this dark place longer was unbearable. With a deep breath, Sarah pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The warehouse above her was eerily silent, but faint sounds, distant whispers, and the occasional shuffling came from below. Sarah descended cautiously, each step causing the staircase to groan under her weight. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they formed a cacophony of voices, each speaking in a language she could not understand. The walls of the staircase seemed to pulse with a strange, otherworldly energy, and shadows danced along the walls as though alive. At the bottom of the stairs, Sarah found herself in a vast, underground cavern. The air was cold and damp, and the cavern walls were covered in strange, luminescent fungi that emitted a sickly green glow. The cavern stretched out before her, filled with ancient ruins and broken statues that seemed to watch her every move. In the center of the cavern was a massive stone altar, similar to the one she had seen earlier, but far more elaborate. The altar was surrounded by a circle of burning candles, their flames flickering in a rhythm that seemed almost hypnotic. The ground around the altar was littered with strange symbols and arcane inscriptions. As Sarah approached the altar, she noticed a large book lying open on its surface. The pages were filled with indecipherable text and disturbing illustrations, twisted images of grotesque creatures and dark rituals. The book seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the very air around it felt charged with malevolent power. Suddenly, the ground beneath Sarah's feet began to tremble. She stumbled, catching herself on the edge of the altar. The cavern's walls seemed to shift and warp, and the whispers grew louder, coalescing into a single, malevolent voice. The voice spoke of ancient rituals and forbidden knowledge, promising power and immortality in exchange for a price. Desperation fueled Sarah's actions. She grabbed the book and flipped through its pages, hoping to find anything that could help her escape. Her eyes fell upon a particular passage that seemed to describe a ritual for summoning and banishing dark entities. Though the text was obscure and fragmented, she recognized key phrases that mentioned the final gate and the key to freedom. Suddenly, the cavern's temperature plummeted, and the shadows around her grew darker and more menacing. The creatures from before appeared once more, emerging from the shadows with a hunger in their eyes. They moved with an unnatural grace, surrounding the altar and closing in on Sarah. Panic surged through her as she read the passage aloud, hoping that reciting the ritual would somehow drive the creatures away. As she spoke the ancient words, the symbols on the ground began to glow with a bright, blinding light. The creatures recoiled, their forms writhing in agony as the light intensified. The cavern shook violently, and the walls cracked and splintered. Sarah continued to recite the ritual, her voice rising above the cacophony of sounds. The light grew blinding, and the creatures screeched in terror as they were engulfed by the light. In a final, desperate act, Sarah threw the book into the center of the glowing symbols. The book burst into flames, and the light surged upward, consuming the cavern and the creatures within. The entire structure began to collapse, and Sarah felt herself being pulled away from the altar. The blinding light enveloped her, and she felt a sensation of weightlessness. When the light finally dimmed, Sarah found herself back on the surface, lying on a familiar city street. The night air was cool and crisp, and the sounds of the city were a welcome contrast to the horrors she had experienced. The gas station was still there, but it looked normal, clean, and well lit, with no sign of the previous night's horrors. Sarah stood up, her legs shaky, and glanced around. The city seemed unchanged, but she knew better. The darkness she had encountered was not easily banished, and the city's sinister underbelly still lurked beneath the surface. As Sarah walked away from the gas station, she felt a sense of unease. The city was safe, for now, but the dark forces she had encountered were not entirely vanquished. They were still out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to stumble upon their ancient, malevolent power. Sarah knew she would never be the same. The horrors of the night had left their mark on her, and the darkness that had once consumed her would forever remain a part of her. As she ventured into the city, she vowed to remain vigilant, knowing that the shadows could return at any moment. And so, the fuel of the damned continued to burn in the heart of the city, a reminder of the ancient evils that lurked just beyond the edge of reality, waiting for those who dared to uncover their dark secrets. Sarah's return to the city was marked by an uneasy calm. The streetlights flickered intermittently as she walked, their glow casting long shadows that seemed to twist and writhe. The city's noise, usually a comforting backdrop, now felt like an ominous murmur, a reminder of the dark forces that had surfaced from its depths. As she made her way through the city, Sarah's thoughts were consumed by the night's events. The warehouse, the creatures, and the ancient book haunted her memories. Despite the relative normalcy of her surroundings, an unshakable feeling of dread clung to her. She decided to seek help. Reaching her apartment, she packed essentials: clothes, some food, and her few personal belongings. Her only plan was to leave the city and find a place far from the dark influence she had encountered. Yet, even as she prepared, she could not escape the feeling that the horrors were not truly behind her. It was late into the night when Sarah finally decided to leave. She locked her apartment door and headed towards her car, parked in the dimly lit lot. As she approached, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man with hollow eyes and a weary expression. It was the gas station attendant. "Sarah," the man said, his voice a haunting echo of the past. "You didn't think you could escape, did you?" She stumbled back, her heart pounding. "How did you?" The attendant's face twisted into a grotesque smile. "The city is a nexus. It connects the realms of the living and the damned. You can't run from what's already within you." Before Sarah could react, the ground beneath her began to tremble. The city's landscape warped and twisted, the buildings contorting into nightmarish shapes. The familiar street turned into a grotesque reflection of the cavern she had escaped from. Shadows writhed and coalesced into monstrous forms, their eyes glowing with the same malevolent hunger she had seen before. Desperately, Sarah raced to her car, hoping to drive away, but the roads had turned into labyrinthine mazes, leading her deeper into the city's dark heart. Each turn brought her face to face with twisted, otherworldly versions of familiar landmarks. The city was no longer a safe haven but a sinister, shifting realm. In her frantic drive, Sarah ended up back at the gas station, but it was no longer the decrepit place she had first seen. It was pristine and eerily calm, its neon sign glowing with an unsettling vibrancy. The attendant stood waiting, a dark, knowing smile on his face. "You're here for a reason, Sarah," he intoned. The Nexus requires a sacrifice to maintain balance between the realms. Sarah's blood ran cold as the realization dawned upon her. The gas station was not just a place but a focal point for the ancient dark forces she had unwittingly awakened. The city, too, was a part of this malignant design. "No," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I don't want to be a part of this." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The attendant approached her with a grim determination. "It's already too late. The darkness within you has been awakened, and it demands retribution." As the attendant reached out, the nightmarish creatures materialized around them, their forms a grotesque reflection of the horrors Sarah had encountered. The city's walls seemed to close in, and the darkness grew thicker, wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. Sarah felt a strange calm as the creatures closed in, their eyes glowing with a hunger she could not escape. She had faced the darkness before, but now it seemed to envelop her entirely. The city's distortions merged with the cavern's oppressive energy, forming a vortex of consuming darkness. In the final moments, Sarah understood that there was no true escape from the horrors she had faced. The city. No true escape from the horrors she had faced. The city, the gas station, and the ancient forces were all intertwined, an eternal cycle of fear and darkness. She had become part of the Nexus, her fate sealed as a conduit for the malevolent forces that lurked just beyond the edge of reality. The last thing Sarah saw was the attendant's shadowed face, a twisted reflection of the darkness that now enveloped her. The creature's eyes gleamed with a cold satisfaction as the light from the gas station's neon sign flickered and died. And then, the darkness consumed everything, leaving only silence and the faint echo of her final scream in the heart of the city. Alright everyone, that brings us to the end of our story. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. And if you have similar stories you'd like to share with us, feel free to reach out. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.